Please be seated. The court is now back in session. For this afternoon session, the chamber will continue to hear the testimony of the expert Chim Sothira, who will be questioned by the prosecution, and the prosecution has 20 minutes to do so. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to you, sir, to the judges and to the parties, and to the expert. In the next 20 minutes, I want to look with you at two subjects. One is your abilities and your qualifications, and the other concerns the work that you have done with Khmer Rouge victims. So let's quickly sketch out your qualifications. I might suggest we briefly summarize what came out of your hearing before this chamber in 2009, added to which there is what you said yesterday, and then at the end I'll ask you to correct me if I've made some mistakes. So basically you have been a surgeon since 1992. After that you specialized in psychiatry, and you were awarded a diploma in 1998 from Oslo University, and then you went through further education in 1999 in New South Wales in Australia for 18 months. And right now you're completing a doctorate in psychiatry from Monash University in Melbourne while practicing as a psychiatrist. And you've been doing this for 19 years. And you're also working as the director of TPO since 2002, in other words, for 11 years. Am I correct so far?
Yes, in general, it is correct. In fact, regarding the psychiatry degree, it was not from the Oslo University. It was the joint study by the Oslo University and the Department of Health in Phnom Penh. And it was not a medical doctor from Monash University. In fact, it was a PhD degree in transcultural psychiatry from Monash University, and I am in the final year.
Very good. You also said that TPO Cambodia was established in 1994, and before this chamber in 2009 you said that the TPO program essentially aimed to satisfy the psychological needs of the Cambodian population suffering from psychosocial and mental repercussions of the Khmer Rouge regime, in particular with respect to post-traumatic stress syndrome. And you told us that TPO was active not only in Phnom Penh, but also was working with traumatized people who participated in ECCC trials. And in addition to that, with people who were traumatized and who lived in local communities. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, I know that you are of a modest disposition, but can we say that in Cambodia you are the most qualified and most experienced psychiatrist, in particular with respect to traumatism that Cambodians underwent during the Khmer Rouge regime?
Yes, I think you can safely say that.
Pourriez-vous nous dire
Can you tell us what proportion of your day-to-day work as a psychiatrist and as the head of TPO is devoted to therapy or to supervision of psychological or psychiatric assistance activities given to victims of the Khmer Rouge? In other words, does this take up a good part of your daily work?
In relation to my daily work, my 50% of the time is related to the management, 30% or 20% is related to research and the clinical works and the training. So the last three compose about 50% of my daily time.
Merci.
Thank you. In our files, we have an article that you jointly authored, Code E285.1.4. I'm not going to delve into its contents. It was published in the Journal of Affective Disorders, and the title of the article is Prolonged Grief Disorder, 3 Decades Post-Loss in Survivors of the Khmer Rouge Regime in Cambodia. Aside from that article, and perhaps I will repeat the references, it's E285.1.4 and the title of the article, published in the Journal of Affective Disorders, is
Prolonged Grief Disorder, 3 Decades Post-Loss in Survivors of the Khmer Rouge Regime in Cambodia.
Aside from drafting that particular article, have you written or jointly authored other articles in international reviews, specialized and well-reputed reviews, and in books?
Yes.
J'ai trouvé sur Internet
In fact, on internet I found 2 recent publications that are signed by you. They're not on the case file, but I'll mention them as we go along. And there are doubtless others too. There's an article that you wrote on your own that was published on the internet, dated 13th of February 2012, published by Monash University, entitled Backspat, a Trauma-Based Cultural Syndrome in Cambodia. And in the article you talk about this syndrome that is particular to the population of Cambodia. I found another article, in fact, that you wrote with Nigel Field in June 2008 in the Journal of Loss and Trauma, which is about the desire for revenge and attitudes towards the Khmer Rouge Tribunal among Cambodians. Apart from those 2 publications, can you tell us if you have published anything else recently?
What you said is correct. There is an article that I wrote and which is ready for publication by a journal, and they recently accepted my article, and it may be published in 6 months' time, and the title is Broken Carriage. It is in fact a forensic evidence amongst the victims of the Khmer Rouge regime. So backspat or the broken carriage is a forensic evidence that is needed for the assessment of the victims of the Khmer Rouge regime, and that article is accepted for its publication, and I am the sole author of that article.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I also read in the media in 2012 and in the 2011 annual report of TPO, which can be seen on your website, that you yourself and TPO had received the 2012 Human Rights Award of the Leitner Center for International Law and Justice from Fordham University in New York, US, in recognition of your work to treat and promote the rights of people who had mental problems in Cambodia. Can you confirm that you were indeed awarded that prize, and have you received other awards in your career as well?
No.
Mais est-ce que vous
But do you confirm that you did receive the award I mentioned, even if you didn't get any other prizes?
Yes, I did receive that award, but I haven't received any other awards.
Merci. Vous avez dit
Thank you. Yesterday you told us that diaspora Cambodians had been treated for trauma by Australian psychiatrists, sometimes in ways that were not particularly successful. Now, what is the importance for psychiatrists working with Cambodian victims, such as yourself, to understand the Khmer language, and in particular the cultural and religious aspects of Cambodia, or indeed the backspat syndrome that you yourself have described as being close to but different from post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, indeed. The experts from the Western countries, they are very familiar with the biological aspect. But when it comes to the emotional reaction based on culture or language, they are not that familiar. So it is necessary for them to understand well about the culture, about the distress symptoms, and if they can work with the Cambodian experts, then the treatment would be far better effective. And regarding the clients that I spoke about yesterday, decided to participate in the cultural religious treatment, and that would lead to a better recovery.
très bien. J'en viens à
Thank you. I'm going to turn to another series of questions which echo those I was asking yesterday. I'd like to know what is particular about the traumatizing events and about the trauma undergone by Khmer Rouge victims, if you compare them to individuals who are traumatized by other random events, such as an attack or an accident or a murder. So what are the specificities and the differences between these two groups of people who may be suffering from trauma?
Thank you for your question. There are two aspects here. First, it's the stress. Stress is a minor reaction or changes that we experience on a daily basis. For instance, just minor changes happening surrounding us that we are blamed for something. That is a stress which is at a lower level and it is temporary and it's going to go away in a short period of time. But when it comes through a trauma, and per its definition in the DSM, which is recognized worldwide, is defined as a shock or an event, and that event could be life-threatening, or it could be a physical injury, or war, or torture. So all those kinds of events, which are not the daily experience that we encounter, and that person faces such an event, or sees it, or hears about it, and upon facing such an event, that person is shocked through an extreme, and that his ability to resolve other issues in straight thinking has changed. Let me give you an example. A torture or events that took place in Cambodia are not the ordinary stress that we experience every day, but instead it is kind of a traumatic event that doesn't happen every time, and that would lead people to lose their ability to resolve things or to control themselves.
Can one say that prolonged exposure to different traumatic events that happen successively over perhaps 3 years, which is not a single random event but which is continuously occurring in time, when you talk about that kind of thing, what impact does it have by comparison to that single random traumatic event?
Thank you for this very good question. Allow me to say that PTSD, as indicated by the Western experts, is for the traumatic event that happened only once in the life of that patient. It is not a prolonged exposure or long-term exposure to such an event. So it is my conclusion when it comes to this PTSD that if we make an assessment of Cambodian people based on the measure of the PTSD, it could be limited for this prolonged or sustained exposure experienced by Cambodian people, because the people here and the events are related to culture and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of psychologists in the world who sometimes say PTSD cannot be used as a measure to assess the people who are suffered through prolonged or sustained exposure to traumatic events. So another new thing that comes out with regard to PTSD for the prolonged or cultural exposure to a traumatic event can be used in a better ways to make an assessment of the Cambodian people who suffered under the regime.
Merci.
Thank you. Well, time is short, so I'll ask 2 final questions. Many civil parties and witnesses who have appeared in this courtroom and who have made statements to investigating judges said that under the Khmer Rouge they had to be evacuated successively from one place to another, Phnom Penh to Takeo, and then a few months later to the northwest of Cambodia towards the region of Battambang. I'd like to know what the consequences are of being uprooted successively on victims who were forced to do this. They were certainly not in agreement. And the fact that this was justified by the Khmer Rouge by a certain number of arguments which the victims call lies. For example, the idea that they had to leave for only 3 days, or that when they were going towards Battambang, they were in fact being taken to Phnom Penh, or they were told that there was a great deal of food where they were going. So what are the psychiatric consequences on victims of both being uprooted and being told lies, or words they certainly described as such?
The Khmer Rouge had a strategy which seems to destabilize the people to lose their ability to challenge. And that kind of strategy actually caused a PTSD through the Cambodian people. And that is the symptom that scared the people and not allow the people to face the issues. Cambodian people in 1975 left Phnom Penh without any protest. And if you imagine that the same thing happened to Thai people living in Bangkok, the scenario would be completely different. So the PTSD experienced by the people under the Khmer Rouge regime and the constant relocation from one place to another, compounded with hard labor and insufficient food, led them to a complete PTSD sufferers. And of course, they suffered more than the ordinary PTSD as defined by the Western experts.
Well, following up on that, on the question of lies, the fact that these people felt that they were being lied to, did that have an effect on their self-esteem and the trust they were able to vest in other people or in other institutions, and in a possible sense of insecurity they might have had to live with?
Allow me to say that it's because of that impact people become distrust of one another, or to conceal their identity, or not to speak about the truthful event. This sense of mistrust is the result of the PTSD, and all these factors are related to the events that took place during the regime.
Mr. President, this is my last question, and I'd like to say thank you to the expert for coming here today. A good many victims have said in this chamber or to investigators that they were not treated as human beings during the Khmer Rouge regime, rather that they were treated as slaves, or they were living in a prison without walls. Did patients talk to you about this feeling of being dehumanized and the traumatism that in itself created? And is Cambodian society today still going through the consequences of this dehumanization process that the victims described?
Yes, some of the patients complained that they were even lower than the human status, as people could talk to one another or had their communication. But under the Khmer Rouge regime, they were not treated as humans. And these kinds of events, compounded with hard labor and lack of food, that caused the people these traumatized events, and that kind of thing remained with them.
Merci.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. President.
President, thank you. The floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense to put questions to this expert. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. I have a few questions to you today. First of all, I would like to ask you a few more questions about your academic background and your professional background. You have been testifying, or you have testified yesterday, that you have been working in the psychological area, as you called it, for almost 19 years. Now, if I understand correctly, you started your medicine study in 1986. You finished it in 92. Did you have any psychological classes in that period, or was that something which was taught in Cambodia at the time?
No, at that time there was no class for the psychology, as the teachers for psychology were killed. The teachers were killed during the Khmer Rouge regime.
Then, in 1992, when you graduated, you started working as a surgeon. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. It was from 1992 to 1994.
After 1994, you went to Norway. Was that to study? Was that a master's? Was it a psychology class in Oslo? What exactly did you do in Norway?
I did not go to Norway. In fact, the University of Oslo had a special training program in Cambodia in collaboration with the health department, and the study was from 1994 to 1998. We studied in a problem-based learning approach. So we actually study and we actually have a hand-on practice. So during the first year, that is in 1994, we actually looked at and provided a treatment to the patients under the close monitoring of the expert professional from Norway.
But it was still a training program, am I correct?
Yes, it is a training program plus a hand-on session, as we were instructed to actually examine the patients from the time that we engage in the study or in the training.
And you finished this training program in 1998, if I'm correct? And afterwards you did a master's in Australia, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And when the master was finished, did you then become director of TPO?
No, not yet. I returned to work in a hospital, in the Khmer Soviet hospital in the Department of Psychology, and it was until 2002 did I become a executive director of TPO.
My question to you, are you in fact a qualified psychiatrist, or somebody who studied psychiatry?
I was trained and recognized by University of Health. I was one of the first 10 recognized or accredited professional in psychiatry.
Let me rephrase it. Are you a clinical psychiatrist?
Yes, I am a consultant psychiatrist.
Do you have a practice as a clinical psychiatrist in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh?
Yes, I have. I have practiced this profession both in my workplace and in private cabinets.
When exactly did you go to Australia to receive your PhD?
I started this PhD degree in 2008.
And have you been full-time in Australia, or is it also a program during which you can study in Cambodia?
I did not study full-time in Australia. According to the study program, I may go once in a while, and as for the research work, I conducted research based in Cambodia.
Last week you received a letter from I think one of the lawyers of the civil parties, a letter containing proposed topics for your testimony, and it reads proposed topics for the testimony of Dr. Chim Sotiara. Are you a doctor in the scientific sense of the word, in the academic sense of the word?
Well, I am a medical doctor, not a PhD holder, because I have not yet obtained my PhD degree.
So are you saying that academically you cannot be referred to as Dr. Chim Sotiara? Is that correct?
ចឹងមានន័យថាបើសិនណាគិតទៅតាមទីរឿងងារក្នុងការរៀនសូត្រនោះគឺលោកមិនតាន់អាចគេមិនតាន់អាចហៅលោកថាជាបណ្ឌិតសុធារាបានទេមែនទេ
I am now a medical doctor, and as for PhD or a doctor, academic doctor title, I am about to get it too.
I take it from your answer that from an academic point of view, we cannot call you doctor. That, you agree with me?
No, I don't call myself a doctor academically. I call myself a specialist in a medical doctor, specialized medical doctor.
Now, in that last capacity as a medical practitioner, how many years of clinical experience do you have?
As I said in my testimony earlier, I started conducting clinical work on the first day of my training. So I have been working as a clinical specialist for a patient for approximately 19 years now.
So when you're saying that you have been working in the field, in the psychological area for 19 years, you include all your training programs and your education. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, as I said, I have been working in this field for almost 19 years. That also includes the times when I studied, because it was on-the-job training, and I actually, in the course of my study, I also apply the skills that I studied.
Maybe my questions come from a misunderstanding of the Cambodian system. I believe in North America and in Europe the system would be that only after a certain amount of professional training and academic training one can call himself or herself a clinical psychiatrist. Is that the case in Cambodia as well?
That is correct. Only when a person obtains a qualification or graduated with a degree, then this person can practice it. But in developing country, it was not necessarily the case because they need certain training, for example, intensive training for 3 months or so, and then that person was equipped with certain skills, and then this person normally practice the profession.
I understand, but if you have studied in a Norwegian program, you're currently doing your PhD in Australia. According to relevant laws in those countries, since when would you, if you transform the analogy, since when would you be able to call yourself a clinical psychiatrist in Cambodia?
I actually had become a clinical psychologist before I undertook the course in the Norwegian program.
I'm not sure if we understand each other, but because of the time, I will move on to another subject. and that is the following. Is it your view that in the period 1975-79, Cambodia has been destroyed in all aspects after or during the KR regime? In other words, is it your view that the Khmer Rouge regime destroyed the entire infrastructure of the country, the social fabric of Cambodia in every aspect?
Yes, they completely destroyed everything.
Is it your view that the Khmer Rouge regime was in fact a genocidal regime?
The President, witness needs not answer this question. This is a legal matters to be decided by the chamber. This question does not fall within the expertise of the expert before us.
I understand the objection. I'm just quoting from his earlier testimony when he called, in fact, the KR regime a genocidal regime. Is it your view that what was done by the KR is completely inappropriate?
The President, Mr. Expert needs not answer this question because this again does not fall within his expertise, and Council, please be advised that the expert before us is coming to testify in relation to the psychological impacts on the civil parties and victims of the Democratic Cambodia period. So you may put the question so long as it relates to his areas of expertise and his capacity as the expert. We have directed parties very clearly that the expert before us today is to testify concerning the psychological impacts as a consequence of the Democratic Cambodia period.
I understand, Mr. President. I'm again merely quoting again from his earlier testimony in case 001. Looking at that same evidence that you have been giving in case 001, it seems that you have very strong negative views on the DK period 1975-79. Would that be a fair summarizing?
Yes, that is correct.
My question to you, having heard your answer, your affirmative answer, would be what have you done both in your clinical work and both in your academic work to avoid your personal views of what happened between 75 and 79 interfere with the work that you have been doing? In other words, how have you been able to leave out your personal views on the DK regime when you were both doing your clinical work and your academic work?
Thank you, Council, for the question. I obtained my medical degree, and then upon my graduation and at the start of my work, I had to take an oath that I adhere to the professional conduct. I would not let my previous experience to interfere in my work, and I would treat a patient and client without any discrimination whatsoever. And in relation to your question whether or not there was a interference in my work when I consulted client, I would like to inform you that TPO is a professional organization. We stand by our code of ethics and professional conduct, and we have a consultation process. The consultation process is meant to reconcile ourselves and to assess ourselves whether or not there is any bias, selection bias, also in the consultation or practice of our profession. And in the course of our work, we also use tools that are recognized internationally in order to avoid the allegation that we do not have any basis in our treatment and counseling. So we have tried our best to ensure that our treatment is acceptable.
I understand. But what have you done concretely in order to avoid an appearance of bias in respect of your academic work?
For example, in the study and research, when we conducted research, we did not use the counselor or staff of TPO, because counselor at TPO, they understand the psychological impact or the psychological disorder. So we make use of people who are outside of the TPO, and those people were trained how to conduct interview, how to use questionnaire, to conduct interview with target individuals. So this is to avoid bias in our responses and analysis.
I'll move on. Yesterday you testified that, and I quote, I can say that the majority of the victims that we have worked with or that we have provided psychological expertise to were traumatized. Now, could you explain to me what you meant when you said we have worked with? What does that mean? Is that clinical treatment, or is that talking in respect of a questionnaire relating to academic work?
It is the combination of two. Part of it was the research, and the other part of it is the consultation and counseling directly with them.
And which of the two is more predominant for you? Would that be the people that you spoke to in respect of academic research, or would that be patients that you have been seeing clinically?
Well, in the course of my research, I myself did not administer the questionnaire, and neither did the staff of TPO. We engaged a third party, somebody else who did not know the process very well, to conduct the interview with the patient. And when we interacted with the clients, we provided counseling for them and consultation.
I'm not sure if I understand. Are you saying that the two things were intertwined, both the clinical experience and the academic research?
As I said earlier, the arguments I raised yesterday was based on the result of my research as well as the clinical experience resulting from my consultation and counseling with clients. But as I said, when we conducted research, I did not talk to the clients myself. We prepared questionnaire, but we did not administer this questionnaire for the interviewees by ourselves. We engaged the third person to conduct interview with the target interviewees. That is a separate work. But as for clinical experience, we provided consultation and counseling, and it is then we met with the clients. The reason why we met them because we wanted to observe the changes of the patient after treatment. We wanted to measure the improvement, if any. That was to avoid any bias or variation in the result.
I'm not sure if I understand you well. I believe there's or there should be maybe a fundamental difference between what you can establish on the one hand in clinical interviews with patients, and on the other hand what the results are from academic research. I will give you an example. And I relate this to the word majority that you used yesterday. You said the majority of the victims that you have worked with were traumatized. If I may use that example, I have a professional law practice in Holland, and if I speak in 1 year to 50 clients, patients in your terminology, and they all have problems with breaking criminal law, that says something about those people coming to my office. But it doesn't say anything about the rest of the population of Holland having problems with the law, with criminal law. Am I correct? In other words, people who are patients and are coming to your practice are only coming to your practice because they already have psychological problems. And it doesn't say anything about if they represent, for instance, a majority of the Cambodian population. Do you understand what I mean?
I don't know if you understand what I have explained. I responded to your question earlier that the statement I made concerning the psychological impact, and you asked me what is the proportion in relation to a clinical experience, a clinical treatment, and the academic research. That was your question earlier, and then I said that the arguments that I raised, the majority of them, a sheer majority of them, were obtained by medical treatment, and others were from my research. And once again, when I conducted research, I made use of different approaches and methodologies. And in the research, we wanted to find out the level of suffering and traumatic experience, and we also wanted to assess the effect or the impact of the treatment. That's why normally in the research I did not get involved in asking the question or using the questionnaire myself. I engaged the third party, and then we obtained the responses from the respondents, and then we calculated the results. So once again, we obtained the feedback by research as well as the direct consultation and counseling. And we met them because we want to diagnose the improvement after administering the treatment for them.
I'm sure it's because of the way I'm questioning, the way I'm phrasing my question, but I'm still not understanding what you're saying. But let me rephrase. In a clinical practice, or in the practice of a clinical psychiatrist, it would be completely logical if the majority, maybe even the vast majority of the patients are suffering a trauma. Why otherwise go to a psychiatrist? Speaking to people using a questionnaire and asking if they are suffering from a trauma is something completely different. Do you agree with me?
Just for clarification, one on clinical treatment, and the other one is the result from an interview or research. So in clinical treatment, how do we know that a person or a client suffer from a traumatic event or he has a psychological disorder? So we have to use the criteria. We have a statistical manual or international classification of disease as the criteria for our assessment. So based on these internationally recognized tools, we can come to a conclusion that this person is suffer from psychological disorder. And if you ask me to generalize whether or not people suffered from psychological disorder, I cannot respond to you objectively, but I can say that more and more psychological disordered people are on the rise, and they are seeking treatment and counseling as well. But I cannot come to a definite answer as to how many percent of the Cambodian people, particularly the victims of the regimes, suffer from traumatic disorder or psychological disorder. The research that I have done so far was only with the clients that have come to me to seek my consultation and treatment.
Thank you for that answer. I think we are almost agreeing now. But just to be sure, when you said yesterday that the majority of the victims that you had worked with were traumatized, you were in fact referring to people that you saw clinically, or that your institute saw clinically. Is that correct?
Yes, those who came to my clinics and those who receive our counseling services through our outreach programs. We have our teams going to the countryside as well to provide counseling in the countryside. So not only those who come to see us clinically in our office, but also those who came to us through our outreach program.
Very well. Now, speaking about the Cambodian population as a whole, would you agree with me that research seems to indicate that not a majority of the Cambodian people are suffering from trauma, but rather a percentage which varies but is usually indicated at around 14%?
មានប្រជាជនតែ1/4ទេដែលគាត់ប៉ះទង្គិចផ្លូវចិត្តបើសិនយើងគិតចំនួនប្រជាជនទាំងមូលតើលោកឯកភាពទេត្រង់ចំណុចហ្នឹងតើលោកសួរសំណួរហ្នឹងផ្អែកទៅលើអី
What statistic or data are you relying on in your reference? And I can reply to you based on certain documents that I have. In 2002, 2003, there is a population study, but it is not conducted for the entire country, and it was conducted within 3 provinces. The study was about the trauma, the level of trauma from the lower to the higher level, and the random subject was more than 1,000 people within the 3 provinces. And the result that we obtained is that 2 out of 5 subjects experienced trauma from the lower to the more serious level, and that includes depression, anxiety, and psychosis. And that study was conducted by Lyon, and a book was published, Trauma, War, and Violence. And recently, a study by Sonis et al. In 2012 and it is a population study, and that can also be trusted, and that we can also generalize based on the result of the study. And the study is for those who is 16 years of age and above, and the statistic of trauma is about 14%.
So maybe I'm again not understanding your answer completely, but are you agreeing that the percentage of the Cambodian population presently suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder is around 14%?
%14 is only for PTSD, but if you consider the range from mild to severe trauma, then we can use this indicator, the PSD, as an indicator, because PAT is just one of the factors, and there are other factors including the anxiety and psychosis, for instance.
Let me rephrase my question. Would you be able to say right now which percentage of the Cambodian population is suffering from one or the other psychological disorder as a result of the decay period 75-79?
I cannot make a conclusion based on all those diseases or psychological disorders, but let me give an example. Based on a study by Sonis, 14% of the subject, that is amongst those 1,000 people, have PTSD syndrome. That study is a reliable one, although we cannot generalize that the entire population experiences the same syndrome. And if we use the screening tool, which is culturally appropriate, maybe the result is different from this study.
But yesterday you did speak about the majority of the Cambodian people. Literally you said, I'd like also to add that Cambodian people, that is the majority of them, seem to fall into this avoidance symptom more than other people in the world. That is the post-war or traumatic experience. So my general observation is that Cambodian people avoid talking about the Khmer Rouge regime even within the family circle. Here you seem to draw conclusions in respect of, again, the majority of the Cambodian people.
President, Mr. Expert, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems to me that the defense is muddling up the terms. The expert talk about 14% as the result of a PSTN study, and now he says, yes, yesterday you said that the majority of the population is suffering from an avoidance syndrome resulting from traumatism, but it's not the same thing. The syndrome of post-traumatic stress is a clinical diagnosis, but general traumatism is much broader and can concern more than 14% of the population. That was what was said, in fact, in the 2002 study. So perhaps the expert could explain, but it seems to me that the question in itself is not really very consistent with what was said before.
The prosecutor might very well be right. To me, it's not clear yet what the expert has been testifying yesterday and today. The only thing that I have been observing yesterday is that the expert has been testifying on the majority of the Cambodian population, and I'm just trying to establish when he uses the word majority what that in fact means, and on which grounds he is basing himself upon. So I'm not necessarily attacking the expert. I'm just trying to get clarification on what exactly he means when he's speaking about the majority of the Cambodian people, and on what he is basing himself. Maybe I'll move on. You've heard, Mr. Expert, my reply. Would you be able to explain again those percentages, 14%, and what you have been saying earlier yesterday after questions about what the majority of Cambodian people might be suffering of?
When I spoke about 14%, 14% is only for PTSD, and PTSD is just one of the several symptoms for the psychological disorder. And what I said, that the majority of Cambodian people experience the avoidant syndrome more than the rest of the people in the world. And avoidance is one of the trauma. And it's because of this avoidance syndrome, it may further indicate that more people have the traumatic experience, but they avoid coming to seek assistance, psychological assistance or the service. And based on that, I can conclude that there are more people who have these symptoms, but it's because of the avoidance syndrome they do not come to get the service from us, because they don't want to experience the suffering again. Yes, and that is my response, that maybe the study needs to broaden a little bit further to cover more. President, thank you, expert and counsel. The time is appropriate for a short break. And before the break, I would like to remind the expert, please try to use the Khmer language as you mingle the foreign language and the Khmer language, and it is difficult for us to understand it in the Khmer language, as when you use a foreign language, that is those specific terms, the Khmer interpreters, they follow your specific terms, and for us and for the public, we are unclear of what it means in the Khmer language. And I hope that after we return, you may please use those terms in the Khmer language. That's for the sake of our understanding and for the public as well, so then we may know more about your expertise. The time is appropriate for a break, and we shall break and resume at 3 p.m. Court officer, could you assist the expert during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 3 p.m.
សូមជើញក្រោកឈរ